The stars had watched Earth for a very long time, and the creatures who lived among those stars had grown bored with what they saw. Ambassador Velik of the Kethrani Dominion stood before the observation window of his diplomatic cruiser, his 4 eyes scanning the data. Streams that floated before him like glowing ribbons of light. The reports were the same as they had been for 300 years. Earth remained a primitive world filled with primitive creatures who fought among themselves over patches of dirt and drops of water. They had only recently discovered how to split the atom, and they used that knowledge to threaten each other with destruction rather than to reach for the stars. Velik let out a sound that served as laughter. Among his kind, these humans were predictable. Just like every other young species the Galactic Concord had encountered in its 10,000 years of dominance, they would be welcomed into the galactic community with open arms and gentle words, and they would accept their place at the bottom of the hierarchy without question. That was how it always worked. Strong guided the weak, and the weak provided labor and resources in exchange for protection. It was the natural order of things. Fleet Commander Torvax entered the chamber with heavy footsteps, his armored body reflecting the blue light of distant stars. He reported that the fleet was ready and that 12 warships of the combined fleet awaited the ambassador's command. Velik turned from the window and nodded his approval. Torvax was a competent officer from the Varak species, a race of warriors who had been conquered by the Concord 8,000 years ago. They now served as the military backbone of galactic civilization, proud to enforce the will of their masters. The ambassador gestured toward the navigation display and gave the order to Iord. Proceed to the 3rd planet of the Yellow Star system. They would arrive with overwhelming force, not to threaten, but to remind these humans of their insignificance. First contact was always a delicate matter, and it helped when the younger species understood immediately that resistance was not an option. The fleet jumped into hyperspace, leaving behind trails of light that faded into the endless dark across the void of space. In a place that no alien sensor had ever detected, Captain Daniel Harris stood on the bridge of humanity's greatest secret. The Earth defense vessel Goliath stretched 9 kilometers from bow to stern, a mountain of metal and fire hidden within the hollowed core of Mars for 30 years. This ship had been under construction, and for 30 years, every nation on Earth had contributed to its creation. Harris was a tall man with gray hair and steady hands, a veteran of 3 wars who had been chosen for this command. Because he did not know how to feel fear, he looked at the holographic display before him and watched the alien fleet begin its journey toward Earth. They were coming, just as the intelligence reports had predicted. Commander Kate Sullivan approached from the tactical station, her red hair tied back in a tight knot. She informed the captain that long-range sensors had confirmed 12 hostile contacts entering hyperspace with an estimated arrival time of 6 hours. Harris acknowledged her report without turning his head. He had known this day would come since he first learned the truth about the universe 30 years ago. A small research team had intercepted alien communications passing through the solar system. Those communications revealed a terrible truth about galactic civilization. The Concord did not welcome new species as equals. They absorbed them, exploited them, and erased their cultures over generations until nothing remained but obedient servants. Had been scheduled for contact within a century, and the humans who discovered this information made a choice that would change everything. They chose to fight every government on Earth, receive the intelligence in secret, and for the first time in human history, every nation agreed on a single goal. They would build a weapon so powerful that no alien force would dare to threaten humanity. They would build the Goliath. Admiral Henry Clayton appeared on the communication screen, his weathered face tight with tension. He spoke from Earth Command, hidden beneath a mountain in Colorado. and his voice carried the weight of 7 billion lives. He told Harris that the moment had arrived, and that the alien fleet would reach Earth space within 6 hours. He asked if the Goliath was ready. Harris turned to face his commanding officer and replied with simple confidence that they were ready. Clayton nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting decades of preparation and sacrifice. He reminded Harris that the fate of humanity rested on his shoulders and that he should make their ancestors proud. The screen went dark, and Harris allowed himself a single breath of contemplation. He thought of his daughter back on Earth, a young woman who dreamed of exploring the stars. She would get that chance, but only if he succeeded today. He thought of his father, a soldier who had taught him that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Thought of every human who had ever looked up at the night sky and wondered if they were alone today. They would have their answer. Chief Engineer Larry Costa reported from the engine room. His voice crackling through the intercom, he announced that all reactor systems were operating at full capacity and that they were ready to give those aliens a very bad day. Harris allowed himself a small smile at Costa's enthusiasm. Engineer had spent 20 years of his life building the Goliath's power core, a device that used principles of physics the aliens had never discovered, while the Concorde relied on fusion reactors. Earth had developed something far more advanced in the desperate drive for survival. Lieutenant Commander Scott Palmer monitored the weapon systems from his station, his fingers dancing across holographic controls. Reported that all primary and secondary weapon arrays were online and targeting systems were calibrated. The young officer had joined the project straight out of the academy. Recruited for his exceptional tactical mind, he had never seen combat, but he had trained for this moment every day for 7 years. Commander Sullivan moved to stand beside the captain. Her voice low and thoughtful, she observed that the aliens had no idea what was waiting for them, and that their arrogance would be their undoing. Harris nodded in agreement and replied that arrogance was a weakness. They would exploit the Concorde, expected to find frightened primitives huddled on a small blue planet instead. They would find humanity standing tall with the greatest warship ever built at their command. The Goliath's engines hummed to life, a deep vibration that resonated through every deck of the massive vessel. Crew members moved to their stations with practiced efficiency, each one aware of their role in the coming confrontation. They were soldiers, scientists, engineers, and pilots drawn from every nation on Earth. They spoke different languages and came from different cultures, but they shared one unbreakable bond. They were human, and they would not kneel. Harris gave the order to release docking clamps and engage primary thrusters. The Titan warship began its slow emergence from the Martian core, rising through tunnels of carved stone toward the surface above red dust, scattered in great clouds as the Goliath broke free of its hiding place and ascended into the thin Martian atmosphere. The ship climbed higher and higher until the rust-colored planet fell away. Beneath it, before them, lay the endless expanse of space. And somewhere in that darkness, an alien fleet approached with conquest in their hearts. Harris looked out at the stars and spoke quietly to himself. He whispered that humanity was coming and that the universe had better be ready. The Goliath set course for the outer planets, its massive form cutting through the void like a blade of steel and fire. The first contact between Earth and the galaxy was about to begin, and nothing would ever be the same again. The Kathrani fleet emerged from hyperspace near the largest planet in the human solar system, a massive ball of swirling gases that the primitives called Jupiter. Ambassador Velik stepped onto the command deck of his diplomatic cruiser with the confidence of a being who had never known defeat. He had performed first contact ceremonies 47 times throughout his long career, and each one had followed the same predictable Patton, a young species, would tremble at the sight of the fleet. They would listen to his carefully prepared speech about the benefits of joining the Galactic Concord. They would sign the treaties and accept their place as servants. It was simple, efficient, and utterly boring. Vlik hoped the humans might provide some small entertainment before they surrendered. Fleet Commander Torvax stood at the sensor station, his massive clawed hands moving across the controls with practiced ease. He initiated standard system scans and reported the preliminary readings showed minimal technological development concentrated on the third planet. A few primitive satellites orbited the world, along with some chemical propulsion vehicles exploring the nearby planets. Nothing of concern, nothing unexpected. Vlik waved one of his four hands dismissively and ordered the fleet to proceed toward the human homeworld at standard approach speed. He wanted the primitives to see them coming. He wanted them to have time to understand the power that was descending upon their insignificant world. The 12 warships of the combined fleet arranged themselves in ceremonial formation, their hulls gleaming with the reflected light of the distant yellow sun. Each ship was a marvel of galactic engineering, built using knowledge accumulated over 10,000 years of technological advancement. Their weapons could reduce cities to ash in seconds. Their shields could withstand the primitive nuclear devices the humans had developed. Their sensors could detect a single life form from millions of kilometers away at least. That was what everyone believed. The fleet had traveled halfway to the asteroid belt when Torvax noticed something strange on his displays, a flicker of energy where there should have been nothing but empty space. He adjusted his sensors and ran the scan again. Certain that he had made an error, the reading vanished, then reappeared, then vanished again. Torvax felt the first cold touch of uncertainty creep into his warrior heart. He reported to the ambassador that he was detecting anomalous readings near the fourth planet and that the sensors were having difficulty identifying the source. Velik turned toward the fleet commander with mild irritation and asked, "What kind of anomalous readings?" Before Torvax could answer, every sensor array in the entire fleet overloaded. Simultaneously, alarms screamed across 12 warships as instruments designed to map the fabric of space-time simply stopped working. Display screens flickered with static and error messages. Officers shouted in confusion as their carefully maintained systems descended into chaos. And then the Goliath, the cloaked human warship, appeared from nothing, as if reality itself had parted to reveal a monster hiding behind a curtain of stars hung in the void between the fleet and the red planet, its 9-kilometer hull blocking out the distant sun like an eclipse of metal. And Firevlik stared at the view screen with all four of his eyes, and for the first time in his 300-year life, he could not breathe. His respiratory system, evolved for calm deliberation in the most stressful situations, simply seized in primal terror around him. Officers of 6 different species experienced the same paralysis. Some made sounds of disbelief. Others fell to their knees in shock. One Vorax warrior, a veteran of 100 battles, simply turned and walked away from his station, unable to process what his eyes were showing him. The human vessel was impossible. It was larger than any warship the Concorde had ever built. It was larger than most space stations. Its hull radiated energy signatures that defied every known principle of physics. Weapons systems of unknown configuration lined its surface like the spines of some ancient predator from a nightmare. Torvax found his voice after what felt like an eternity of silence, whispered that this could not be real and that the humans were supposed to be primitive. On the bridge of the Goliath, Captain Daniel Harris watched the alien fleet with cold satisfaction. The plan had worked perfectly. Cloaking system had hidden them until the moment of maximum psychological impact. and now the invaders were paralyzed with shock. Exactly as the strategists had predicted, Lieutenant Commander Scott Palmer reported from his tactical station that all 12 hostile contacts had stopped their approach, and that their weapon systems appeared to be offline. Likely due to sensor overload, Commander Kate Sullivan confirmed that the alien fleet was broadcasting on multiple frequencies with what appeared to be distress signals and requests for reinforcement. Harris nodded slowly and observed that they were scared. Good, let them feel what humanity had felt for 30 years. Knowing that something more powerful was watching from the darkness, he gave the order to open a communication channel on all frequencies. Chief Communications Officer Maria Santos worked her controls with steady hands, translating the captain's words into 400 galactic languages using algorithms developed from decades of intercepted alien transmissions. Harris straightened his uniform and stepped forward to face the visual pickup, spoke with measured authority, introducing himself as Captain Daniel Harris of the Earth defense vessel Goliath. He welcomed the visitors to humanity's solar system and expressed hope for peaceful dialogue between their civilizations. He stated that Earth sought friendship, not conflict, but that any hostile action against human territory would be met with immediate and overwhelming response. The message ended, and silence fell across the bridge. Every crew member held their breath, waiting to see how the aliens would react. On the diplomatic cruiser, Ambassador Velik finally managed to fill his lungs with air. His mind raced through possibilities, searching for any explanation that would make sense. The long-range surveys had been conducted only 80 years ago. At that time, the humans were barely capable of powered flight. They had no space capabilities whatsoever. How could they have built this monster in less than a century? It was impossible. It violated every model of technological development a Concord had ever observed. Species did not advance this quickly. It simply did not happen. Fleet Commander Torvax approached with trembling steps and asked what they should. Dovlik looked at the viewscreen, at the Titan warship that dwarfed his entire fleet, and realized that all his prepared speeches were worthless. He could not condescend to creatures who possess power like this. He could not threaten beings who could clearly destroy his entire force with a single salvo. For the first time in his career, Ambassador Velik would have to treat a younger species as equals. The thought made him feel sick. He gave the order to respond to their transmission and to accept a human invitation for dialogue. He instructed Torvax to power down all weapons systems as a gesture of good faith around him. Officers exchanged glances of disbelief. The Kethrani did not make gestures of good faith. They made demands, but none of them argued with the ambassador's orders. They had all seen the human ship. They had all felt their sensors fail and their courage crumble. Whatever happened next, they knew one terrible truth: the universe had just changed forever. The response from the alien fleet arrived within minutes, a transmission filled with diplomatic language that barely concealed the fear. Underneath, Ambassador Velik's voice carried through the Goliath speakers, translated into English by the ship's advanced computer systems. He greeted the humans with respect and accepted their invitation for dialogue. He proposed a meeting on neutral ground to discuss the future relationship between Earth and the Galactic Concord. Captain Harris listened to the message with his arms crossed over his chest. He had studied the Kethrani for years, learning everything humanity could gather from intercepted communications and long-range observations. He knew that these creatures had never shown respect to a younger species before. He knew that their offer of dialogue was born from terror, not genuine friendship. But that was exactly what humanity needed. Fear would keep them honest. At least for now. Commander Kate Sullivan approached with a data tablet in her hands and reported that their analysts had finished studying the alien fleets capabilities, she explained that based on power signatures and weapon configurations, the 12 warships posed no threat to the Goliath whatsoever. Their shields were generations behind. Human technology, their weapons would barely scratch their hull. Harris took the tablet and studied the numbers for himself. The gap was even larger than they had hoped. 30 years of desperate innovation had given humanity a lead of perhaps 5,000 years over the Concorde. Was almost absurd. But desperation had driven human scientists to achievements that peace and comfort never would have inspired. He gave the order to agree to the meeting and propose coordinates near the 6th planet as a neutral location. The ringed world the humans called Saturn would serve as a fitting backdrop for negotiations that would reshape galactic history. Lieutenant Commander Scott Palmer worked with Chief Communications Officer Maria Santos to transmit the response within an hour. Both sides had agreed on the details. The meeting would take place on a station constructed by both parties, built in orbit around Saturn using materials and labor from each civilization. It would take 3 days to complete construction. 3 days of tense waiting while two fleets watched each other across millions of kilometers of empty space. During those 3 days, Captain Harris walked the corridors of the Goliath and spoke with his crew. He found Chief Engineer Larry Costa in the engine room, surrounded by displays showing the ship's power systems operating at peak efficiency. Costa looked up with a grin and remarked that the aliens had no idea what they were dealing with. Harris agreed, but reminded the engineer that they needed to keep it that way. Their advantage depended on the Concorde, never understanding how human technology actually worked. Costa nodded and promised that he would take the secrets of the reactor core to his grave. He had invented half of the systems himself, and he would not let them fall into alien hands in the medical bay. Dr. Beth Morgan prepared her team for the possibility of contact with alien biology. She was a xenobiologist who had spent her career studying theoretical models of extraterrestrial life. Now she would finally meet real aliens, and she wanted to be ready for anything. Harris asked if she was nervous. Morgan admitted that she was terrified, but explained that terror had never stopped her from doing her job. The captain smiled and told her that was exactly why she had been chosen for this mission. On the 3rd day, the station was completed, floated in Saturn's shadow. A modest structure built from human steel and alien composite material. Shuttlecraft from both sides approached simultaneously, their running lights blinking in the darkness like stars falling toward the planet. Harris led the human delegation, accompanied by Commander Sullivan, Dr. Morgan, and a security detail of 6 soldiers armed with weapons the aliens had never seen. Ambassador Velik led the Kethrani delegation, flanked by Fleet Commander Torvax and several advisors from different Concorde species. They met in the central chamber of the station, a circular room with transparent walls that offered a stunning view of Saturn's rings. For a long moment, neither side spoke. Harris studied the aliens with open curiosity. The Kethrani were tall and thin, with 4 arms and 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on their elongated facetervacs, and the Varax were shorter but heavily built, their bodies covered in natural armor that gleamed under the artificial lights. The other species varied wildly in form and size. Proof of the diversity of life that existed throughout the galaxy. Vlik broke the silence first and welcomed the humans to this historic meeting. He expressed hope that their civilizations could find common ground despite their differences. His words were smooth and practiced, but Harris noticed a slight tremor in his voice. The ambassador was still afraid. Good. Harris responded with equal formality and thanked the ambassador for his willingness to engage in peaceful dialogue. He explained that humanity had learned of the Galactic Concorde some 30 years ago and had been preparing for this moment ever since. Sevlik's 4 eyes widened slightly at this revelation. He asked how the humans had learned of the Concorde without being contacted directly. Commander Sullivan answered for the captain. She explained that human scientists had intercepted long-range communications passing through their solar system. Those Communications had painted a clear picture of galactic civilization and humanity's expected place within. And she paused and added that humans did not appreciate being scheduled for subjugation. The chamber fell silent again. Fleet Commander Torvax shifted uncomfortably, his clawed hands clenching and unclenching. Other alien delegates exchanged nervous glances. They had been caught. Their assumptions about human ignorance had been completely wrong. Velik recovered his composure with visible effort and asked, "What?" The humans wanted. Harris laid out humanity's position. In simple terms, Earth sought peace, trade, and mutual respect. Humanity had no interest in conquest or domination. They did not wish to rule over other species or expand their territory beyond their own solar system, but neither would they accept subjugation, exploitation, or interference. With their sovereign development, the Goliath existed to ensure these terms were taken seriously. If the Concord attempted to conquer Earth, they would fail. If they attempted to absorb humanity through economic manipulation, they would fail. If they attempted any form of coercion whatsoever, they would fail. Humanity would remain free, or the galaxy would burn. Velik stared at the human captain for a long moment. He had negotiated with dozens of species, but he had never faced one that spoke with such quiet confidence. The humans were not bluffing. They genuinely believed they could defeat the entire Galactic Concord if necessary, and based on the readings from the Titan warship, they might actually be right. The ambassador asked if they could see this as the beginning of a new era rather than a minor confrontation. He proposed that the Concord welcome humanity as full members with equal rights and representation. Harris allowed himself a small smile and replied that they could discuss those terms. The negotiations had officially begun. The negotiations continued for 7 days, each session lasting hours as both sides worked through the complex details of a treaty that would reshape galactic civilization. Ambassador Velik had arrived expecting to dictate terms to frighten primitives. Instead, he found himself bargaining with equals who knew exactly what they wanted and refused to compromise on fundamental principles. Captain Harris proved to be a skilled negotiator. Despite his military background, he remained calm under pressure and never raised his voice. But his words carried an undeniable weight. Every delegate in the room understood that the Titan warship waited in the darkness outside, ready to enforce whatever promises were made on the 4th day of negotiations. Velik finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind since the Goliath first appeared. He wanted to know how humans had advanced so quickly a century ago. They were using chemical rockets that could barely reach their own moon now. They possessed technology that surpassed anything the pristine Zeus Concord had developed in 10,000 years. It seemed impossible, and he wanted to understand. Harris glanced at Commander Sullivan, who nodded her permission to share some of the story. The captain leaned back in his chair and explained that humanity had a gift for solving problems when survival was at stake. He described how 30 years ago, a group of researchers had discovered the truth about galactic civilization. They had learned that Earth was scheduled for contact and absorption within a century. They had learned what happened to species who failed to meet the Concord's expectations: slavery, exploitation, cultural erasure, and eventual extinction for those who resisted. Harris paused and let those words hang in the air. He continued that humanity had faced two choices. When presented with this information, they could accept their fate and wait for the conquerors to arrive, or they could unite and fight back. Every nation on Earth had chosen to fight for the first time in human history. There were no borders. When it came to survival, scientists from every country shared their discoveries freely. Engineers collaborated across languages and cultures. Resources flowed from wealthy nations to wherever they were needed most. The entire planet had operated with a single purpose: build a weapon that could protect them from the stars. Dr. Beth Morgan added her perspective. As a scientist who had worked on the project, she explained that human innovation accelerated dramatically when obstacles were removed without the friction of competition and secrecy between nations. Breakthroughs came faster than anyone had predicted. Discoveries in one field sparked advances in others. Within a decade, humanity had developed technologies that would have taken centuries under normal circumstances. She smiled and observed that necessity was the mother of invention. And extinction was quite a motivation. Fleet Commander Torvax listened with growing unease. He had served the Concorde for his entire life, believing that the hierarchy of civilizations was natural and just. The strong ruled the weak, and everyone benefited from order and stability, but the humans had proven that assumption wrong. They had looked at the galaxy's rules and simply refused to play by them. He asked what humans planned to do with their power. Would they conquer other worlds as the Concorde had done? Would they build an empire of their own and force others to serve them? Harris shook his head firmly. He explained that humanity had no interest in ruling over others. They had built the Goliath to protect themselves, not to dominate. Every human on that ship wanted the same thing: freedom to live their lives without fear of alien subjugation. They did not want to become the very thing they had fought against. Commander Sullivan added that Earth was a complicated place with many different peoples and beliefs. They had enough trouble governing themselves without trying to control alien civilizations. Their goal was simple: be left alone to grow and develop at their own pace. If other species wanted to trade or share knowledge, humanity would welcome them, but they would never force anyone to bow. Ambassador Velik studied the humans for a long moment, searching for deception in their words. He had met many species who claimed peaceful intentions while secretly plotting conquest, but the humans seemed genuinely sincere. They truly believed that freedom was more valuable than power. It was a strange philosophy, but perhaps it explained their remarkable achievements. He announced that the Kethrani would support humanity's request for full membership in the Galactic Concorde. Earth would have equal voting rights and territorial protections. No member species would be permitted to interfere with human development. The announcement sent ripples through the alien delegation. Several advisors whispered urgent objections to their superiors. The Concorde had never granted full membership to a species so young. There were protocols and traditions that stretched back 10,000 years. Velik silenced them with a sharp gesture of his upper arms. He declared that the protocols had been written for a different universe. The humans had changed everything, and the Concorde must adapt or face the consequences. He had seen the readings from the Titan warship. He had felt his sensors fail and his courage crumble. The humans could destroy their entire fleet with ease, and everyone in the room knew it. Granting them membership was not generosity. It was survival. Captain Harris accepted the ambassador's offer with a respectful nod. He expressed hope that this agreement would be the foundation of lasting friendship between their peoples. He suggested that they begin drafting the formal treaty immediately so that both sides could return home with good news. The next 3 days were filled with intense work as diplomats and lawyers hammered out every detail of the agreement. Human representatives from Earth joined via communication link, adding their expertise to the negotiations. Dr. Morgan worked with alien scientists to establish protocols for sharing medical and biological knowledge. Chief Engineer Costa advised on the technical specifications that would govern future trade in technology. By the 7th day, the treaty was completed, guaranteed Earth's sovereignty and independence for all time. It established trade relationships based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. It created cultural exchange programs that would allow humans and aliens to learn from each other, and it included a clause. That would change everything any species that faced subjugation by the Concord could appeal to Earth for protection. Humanity would serve as a check on the hierarchy's power, a guardian for the weak against the strong. Balak hesitated before signing that final clause. He knew it would cause trouble with the older Concord members. The Kethrani and their allies had maintained control for 10,000 years by keeping younger species dependent, and afraid this treaty would undermine that system forever. But he also knew that refusing would mean war with humanity, and that was a war the Concord could not win. He signed the document with trembling hands. Captain Harris signed for Earth with steady confidence. The flashbulbs of recording devices captured the moment history had been made when Harris returned to the Goliath. His crew greeted him with cheers that echoed through every corridor. Lieutenant Commander Scott Palmer shook his hand and congratulated him on a job well done. Commander Sullivan embraced him briefly, something she would never have done under normal circumstances. Even Chief Engineer Costa emerged from his beloved engine room to join the celebration, but Harris felt no urge to celebrate. He stood alone on the observation deck, watching Saturn's rings shimmer in the darkness. They had won today, but he knew the real challenges lay ahead. The Concord would not accept this treaty gracefully. There would be plots and schemes and attempts to undermine human power. The galaxy was vast and old, filled with species who would not welcome a young upstart at the table. Harris closed his eyes and made a silent promise. Whatever came next, humanity would face it together. They had built a Titan to protect their world. Now they would need to build something even more powerful, a future worth living for. News of the treaty spread across the galaxy like wildfire, carried by the winds of 1,000 worlds. Within days, every species in the Galactic Concord had heard the story of the human Titan warship that had appeared from nowhere and brought the mighty Kethrani to their knees. Some refused to believe it at first. The humans were supposed to be primitive creatures barely capable of reaching their own moon. The idea that they had built a vessel larger than any Concord warship seemed like fiction, designed to frighten children. But the recordings from the diplomatic fleet told a different story. Ambassador Valak had shared the sensor data with Concord leadership, and those images shattered every assumption the galaxy had held about Earth. The Goliath was real. Its power was beyond measurement, and humanity had revealed themselves as something entirely unexpected, a species that refused to bow. Captain Daniel Harris brought his ship home to thunderous celebration. The Goliath descended through the Martian atmosphere and returned to its hidden berth within the red planet's core. As the massive vessel settled into its docking cradle, Harris stood on the bridge and addressed his crew for the final time. He told them that they had accomplished something remarkable. They had secured humanity's freedom. Without firing a single shot, they had proven that courage and preparation could overcome even the most powerful enemies. He expressed pride in serving alongside every single person on the ship. Crew responded with applause that lasted for several minutes. Many had tears in their eyes. They had dedicated years of their lives to this mission, sacrificing time with families and friends for a goal that had sometimes seemed impossible. Now that goal had been achieved, and they could finally rest. Admiral Henry Clayton met Harris at the docking bay, flanked by representatives from every nation. On Earth, the old officer's weathered face showed a mixture of joy and exhaustion. He embraced Harris like a son and whispered that they had done it. That they had actually done it. Harris replied that the work was not finished yet. The treaty was signed, but keeping it would require constant vigilance. Clayton nodded in agreement but insisted that today was a day for celebration. Tomorrow they would return to planning and preparing. Today they would simply be grateful that humanity still had a future across the planet. Billions of people watched the news broadcasts with amazement and relief. For 30 years, the secret of the Goliath had been kept from the general public. Most Humans had lived their lives unaware that alien eyes watched them from the darkness of space. Now the truth was revealed, and people struggled to process the implications. There were protests in some cities, angry crowds demanding to know why they had not been told. There were religious gatherings where people prayed for guidance in this strange new reality. There were scientists who laughed with joy at the thought of finally meeting other intelligent beings, and there were ordinary families who simply held each other close and felt grateful to be alive. Commander Kate Sullivan returned to her hometown in Montana, where her elderly parents waited on the porch of their farmhouse. Her father had been a soldier himself, and he understood what his daughter had accomplished without needing words. He simply hugged her and told her that her grandfather would have been proud. Sullivan thought of the old man who had taught her to shoot and ride horses and never give up, no matter how hard things got. She wished he could have seen this day. Beth Morgan received offers from universities and research institutions across the world. Everyone wanted the xenobiologist who had helped negotiate humanity's first treaty with alien life, but Morgan declined them all. She returned to the Goliath Project, dedicating herself to understanding the alien species they had encountered. There was so much to learn, so many questions to answer. She could not imagine doing anything else. Chief Engineer Larry Costa retired to a small house in New Mexico, where he spent his days tinkering with machines and watching the stars. He never spoke publicly about his role in building the Goliath's reactor systems. Some secrets were too important to share, even in victory. But sometimes, late at night, he would pour himself a drink and toast the impossible ship he had helped create. Lieutenant Commander Scott Palmer received a promotion and a new assignment. The Earth Defense Fleet was expanding, building more ships to protect humanity's growing interests in space. Palmer would command one of those ships, carrying on the legacy of the Goliath in a new generation of vessels. He accepted the assignment with quiet determination. The work of protecting Earth would never truly be finished. In the far reaches of the galaxy, the ripples of humanity's emergence continued to spread. Young species who had lived under Concord domination for centuries began to whisper of hope. If the humans could stand against the hierarchy, perhaps others could too. Small rebellions sparked on distant worlds, quickly suppressed but never quite forgotten. The seeds of change had been planted, and nothing could stop them from growing. Ambassador Velik returned to the Kethrani homeworld and delivered his report to the Grand Council. The ancient leaders listened in silence as he described the human warship and the treaty he had been forced to sign. Some called for war, demanding that the Concord mobilize its full military might against Earth's council. Patience, arguing that humanity could be undermined through economic pressure and political manipulation. But Velik silenced them all with a single observation. He reminded them that the humans had built the Goliath in 30 years, while the Concord believed they were still using chemical rockets. He asked what else they might be building right now. What other surprises waited in their solar system? The humans had proven themselves capable of impossible achievements. Any attempt to destroy them might only make them stronger. Grand Council fell silent at his words. They had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years by never facing an enemy they could not defeat. Now they faced exactly that, and they had no idea what to do. Generations would pass before the galaxy truly accepted humanity's place among the stars. There would be conflicts and crises and moments when war seemed inevitable, but the humans would face each challenge with the same determination that had built the Goliath. They would adapt and innovate and refuse to surrender no matter what. Obstacles arose. Captain Harris knew this as he stood on the observation deck of Earth Command, watching the sun set over the mountains. His daughter stood beside him, her eyes bright with dreams of the future. She asked him if he thought humans would ever explore the galaxy, traveling to distant stars and meeting new civilizations. Harris smiled and told her that he was certain they would. That was what humans did. They looked at the impossible and found a way to make it real outside. The stars began to appear in the darkening sky, thousands upon thousands of points of light stretching across infinity. Somewhere out there, alien beings told stories about the day humanity emerged from obscurity, stories about sensors that failed, and ambassadors who could not breathe, stories about a young species that looked at the universe and refused to kneel. Those stories would be told for 10,000 years, passed down through generations on 100 different worlds, and always, at the heart of those stories, a simple truth would echo through the ages. Humanity had arrived, and they were not afraid.